I'd said a long time ago, glam stood for gay LA metal.
Howdy, cowboys from hell! It's your local trash panda Slayer here. The 1990s were a weird time for metal music. In the wake of the downfall of glam metal and the meteoric rise of grunge and alternative, pure heavy metal fell by the wayside as the genre went through an experimental phase. Thrash titans were trying to make alt-rock, while the glam metal has-beens were half-heartedly attempting to jump on the grunge bandwagon right after its figurehead took his own life. While all this was happening, the definition of metal was being challenged as a whole, with heavy alternative bands such as Tool and Rage Against the Machine now starting to carry the torch for heavy music, and even electronic elements being added into the genre with the wake of industrial metal. But in the midst of all of that weirdness, one band proved that pure balls-out metal was not dead, and that band was Pantera. Loud, in-your-face, and unapologetically macho, Pantera was a band that refused to sell out or pander to the mainstream, yet still managed to be the biggest metal band of the entire decade, even topping the albums chart in 1994 with Far Beyond Driven. Proof that pure metal still had a large audience during the mid-90s. But what if I were to tell you that's not how Pantera started? And that before becoming the blueprint for what we now know as groove metal, they were in fact a glam metal band. No, really, I'm not making this up. Sure, for many years the band tried to hide this embarrassing era of the band's history, but it's become more of a commonly known fact that the most macho band in history were wearing spandex, makeup, and Aquanet in a failed attempt to fit in with all the other pretty boys. The only question is if this era was a rightfully buried mistake, or an era of overlooked gems that the world is sleeping on. As someone with a soft spot for glam, I thought I'd take a look, and what better place to start than with the debut album. Okay, seriously, what the hell is this album cover? What, are Pantera furries or something? If so, then they sure have one lame and ugly looking persona. I think they were trying to have this cat demon thing look menacing and scary, but he looks too cute and cuddly to be intimidating, and the end result looks like something you'd see off of DeviantArt in the late 2000s. Okay, hilariously bad album cover aside, this is so weird to listen to, knowing what the band would become later on. Some of it is standard early 80s metal that isn't far off from Iron Maiden or Judas Priest, but other times the stuff on here sounds like the kind of radio rock you would hear on the top 40 of the time, such as Biggest Part of Me and Nothing On But the Radio. Both of these songs even contain synthesizers and drum machines, something that was a no-go for pure metal bands in the early 80s. It's almost like they were asking for metal elitists to kick their asses. Overall though, it's not bad, but this was the same year as Def Leppard, Quiet Riot, and Motley Crue all making their voices heard in the mainstream, so this cheap imitation didn't have a chance, and it's only worth listening to out of curiosity. In short, it's mid, as the kids would put it. Now it is 1984. Projects in the Jungle knocks on metal's front door, but nobody answered. I must say though, forgotten as it may be, this is a step up from the Furry album, as I will now refer to Metal Magic as. Not only is the album cover much better, there's more of a speed metal vibe to this one, without the cheesy radio rock overtones from the previous album, and it even opens up with drop D tuning. Pretty cool, huh? Drop D tuning wasn't too common in metal circa 1984, so this is an interesting listen. I'm only mentioning it now, but this was before Pantera got Phil Anselmo on vocals, with an obscure vocalist Terry Lee Glaze on the mic. He does a lot of those Rob Halford-esque high notes. Another thing that separates this incarnation of the band from the gruff and macho vocals we immediately think of whenever someone says the name Pantera. Either that or they're like me and they think of the De Tomaso Pantera. If I ever drive one of those, I'll do it while blasting Pantera, although probably not this album. I Am the Night is basically just another Projects in the Jungle, and honestly, a worse version of it. There is hardly any innovation here, and it not only begins with another radio rock song, but also ends with one. Also, the vocals here have seemingly gotten worse, with some nasally vocals that sound like a really bad impression of Brian Johnson from AC/DC. This would be the last album with Terry Lee Glaze, and that's for the best given the downgrade in vocals on this album, and overall sameness throughout the album. The next year, Pantera would enlist Phil Anselmo as their new vocalist, something that would mark the first shift into the Pantera we all know and love. Now this is more like it. The first truly good Pantera album. Minus the fact that it has the laziest album cover of the bunch. It's just a photo of the band. Like, come up with something more creative than that, man. This is still a far cry from the groove metal that defines 90s Pantera, and does have a bit of a glam influence in areas, but is a step in the right direction, with more speed and even thrash metal influences overall. And Phil Anselmo is a major step up from Terry Lee Glaze. While his vocals on here are still in that Rob Halford style, he's much better at them, and it makes the sound Pantera was trying to go for in the 80s sound much better. While it sounds little like the Pantera of the 90s, this is still a damn good album that's definitely worth checking out. And I do hope one day that the band will have the courage to make this available on Spotify, along with the rest of the 80s albums. I must ask, however, why did 80s Pantera fail? They didn't even come within sniffing distance of the top 100's ass, with the 80s albums languishing in obscurity until the internet became mainstream. Well, firstly, they were signed to independent labels, before the advent of the internet and social media no less. And also, there's the fact that they were trying to be a glam band in Texas. 95% of glam bands came from the LA area, and the rest came from the East Coast, such as Twisted Sister, Cinderella, and Bon Jovi, and Def Leppard being the token British example that got big. And since they refused to move to LA, where major labels would sign any hair band in the 80s, they had to sign to the aforementioned independent labels. And by the time power metal came out, it was starting to get a little too late for them to try to course correct this attempt at glam. Not only was the genre starting to sound more like a slightly heavier Bryan Adams, but the genre would just barely make it into the first days of the 90s before collapsing in spectacular fashion. So they really made the right call by abandoning glam altogether with 1990s Cowboys from Hell. While I can't say I'm the biggest fan of 90s Pantera, I do highly respect them for keeping the spirit of true metal alive in the mainstream, and even inspiring future styles of metal. As for Glamterra, I mainly enjoy projects in the jungle and power metal, but find the other two albums mediocre. Like, overall, Glamterra isn't bad, but there's a lot of unremarkable and generic 80s metal that blends in with the rest of the crowd. Whatever you may say about 90s Pantera, the machismo and "f*** you" attitude makes them truly unique for the time, and their sound is unmatched. Still, I think 80s Pantera deserves to be acknowledged and not buried in the dirt. So if you get a chance, take a listen to this long-lost era of metal history.